All right, so I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so group coaching. I know, Kevin, it's your first one. I think a lot of you, this is not your first one, but we appreciate you guys being here. We love group coaching. It's the first 4 Thursdays of the month. And so we like to start off group coaching with wins. And so I'm gonna start it off here with these guys, T&H Home Improvement. What we're going to be talking about today in group coaching is we're going to be talking about cash flow power moves. And when these guys came to us, cash flow was a little bit profit, a little bit dire. And now, last meeting with them, they were happy to report that they're booked out through August. They're taking 10% deposits and signed contracts on all of their jobs. Not only are they able to pay themselves now, but they've lowered their overhead by 15%. They're dedicating percentages towards profit, and they were able to hire an office person, all because they implemented the systems that we are about to talk about today. So just wanted to brag on them, give them a round of applause. And then I'd love to open up the floor to you guys for any wins that you might have. We'd love to celebrate wins, whether they are large or small. And so just unmute and share away. Any wins? Bryce, did we share your Ironman win last week?
Yeah.
We did.
I think we did. Yeah, it was good though.
Okay. To make sure not many people attempt to do an Ironman, so we've got to brag on you a little bit there for that.
Thank you. Yeah, but last week I was just a blank screen because I couldn't put on clothes or a shirt. I could put on all the other clothes, just not a shirt. So
you would think with your skin tone you would have figured out that the sun doesn't like you by now, but
yes. Thank you.
any other wins, guys? Large, small?
Only if he had somebody to apply the sunscreen.
If only.
Any wins, guys?
I don't know if it's a big win or not for us. We are finally starting to get our home office in order. Organization for me has been kind of a little disarray over the past few months, so I know I'm extremely happy about it. All of our new uniforms and stuff got delivered first thing this morning, so we actually look like a professional team when we go out now. So that's a huge plus to us and our customers. It makes them feel better. Makes me feel better for sure.
Absolutely.
And that's a good looking group on that picture right there. We got some of those same colors in our logos. So that's awesome.
Yeah. Good. Well, that is a win. Congratulations. One improvement, one step at a time. Okay. So let's get this show on the road here today, guys. What we're going to be talking about is cash flow power moves. Has anybody ever been in a situation where you're like, man, my revenue is growing, we're doing a lot more work, but I'm not necessarily seeing it in my accounts? Has anybody ever been in that situation before? Can I get a show of hands? Or maybe it's the feast or famine, where it's like money comes in the account and money comes out of the account. Has anybody ever been in that situation where it's just feast or famine? Yeah. I see a lot of you contractors, and remodelers. I know that can be a trend. And so what I want to talk about today is the most common areas that we see cash flow being hurt and what systems to put in place in order to prevent that. And so the first thing that I wanted to cover here is there is a difference between profitability versus cash flow. We have clients who come to us all the time where if we look at their profit and loss statement, they're looking healthy. They've got a healthy profit margin. They've got a very healthy net profit at the bottom of that profit and loss statement. But they're looking at me saying, Nicole, I have no money. I don't know where that money is. Has anybody been in that position where they've looked at profit and loss statement and said, I don't know where that money is? Yes, we've all been there. And that can be extremely disheartening. A lot of times when that happens, there's two causes. One is maybe your bookkeeping's just inaccurate. So there's always that phase. If your bookkeeping's inaccurate, then that's a whole different beast that we need to tackle. But let's say your bookkeeping is accurate, that you do have accurate financials. Then what that indicates to us is that we have a cash flow issue, not necessarily a profitability issue. So I kind of want to take some time in the beginning of this meeting to really define the difference in between these two things. So first thing here is profitability issues. What that looks like is no matter how much revenue you do, you are still bleeding money. Maybe you've grown significantly, or you're hitting your revenue goals, but you're still not showing any profits. That's a profitability issue. No matter how much revenue you grow, you're never going to see those profits increase. That typically indicates a pricing issue, that our prices are just inaccurate. So even if we're doing more work, we're not making more profits. A lot of times where we see profits being eaten is with overhead costs. Could anybody unmute and maybe tell me what overhead is? Does anybody know what overhead cost is?
Just anything that's not directly related to a job or to the cost of providing the service that you're providing.
Correct, 100%. So your overhead are these reoccurring expenses that don't necessarily go towards the job, but they're going to happen each month. These are things like office expenses, marketing expenses, utilities, internet, insurance, these things that no matter if you're doing work or not, these overhead costs are going to happen. A lot of times when pricing is inaccurate, and we have a whole pricing group call. So if you think this is your issue, please email your coach. We'll get you that pricing group call. We'll start diagnosing this issue with you. But a lot of times it's because we are not accounting for our overhead costs when we're coming up with our prices, which means that what we're thinking is our profit is getting overhead. Now, I don't think this is any of you here, but sometimes profitability issues are because of simply just a poor business model. That no matter how much revenue we do, how many leads we come in, how many work, we're never going to be profitable because it's a poor business model. Maybe we're really needing to increase ticket prices or branch into another industry. But profitability issues is different from cash flow issues. Cash flow issues means that your pricing is accurate and you've made sure of that. You've done estimate comparisons. You've said, what did I originally estimate versus what this job actually cost me? You're tracking your income and expenses. Your prices are accurate, but the cash in the accounts are still feast or famine. You're in a situation where money goes in the account and money goes out of the account, and you're not quite sure where it is going. Has anybody ever experienced that where you're like, money goes in, money goes out? Yeah, that's all I know. I would say, guys, 95% of clients that come to us, that's where they're at. So you are not alone. There's no reasons to be ashamed. Now, cash flow issues, if you know your percentages and your KPIs, and you know they look good, but the cash in the accounts don't reflect that, then that is more than likely a cash flow issue. KPI stands for key performance indicators. These are these data points that we assess to make sure that we're on track. How many leads you have coming in, how many jobs you're closing, how many jobs you're doing, your average ticket. If all of that looks good, but the cash flow is still not reflecting that, we've got a cash flow problem.
I hate to have to say this because it's an unfortunate truth, but you could very well have both of these issues. at
Yeah.
the same time.
That's a good point, Rudy. That's a very good point. Which is why we have group calls about pricing, about overhead, about cash flow, because all of these things a lot of times do work together. They do go hand in hand. I find that seasonal businesses tend to have some cash flow issues. I know that I think I have like 6 clients in Minnesota and I've got 2 in Canada. And it's hard to work in the winter in those places. They're a little bit seasonal. HVAC guys, we live in Oklahoma here. HVAC guys tend to slow down in the winter because we have pretty mild winters. Seasonal businesses can naturally tend to have cash flow issues if we're not being intentional about these things that we're about to talk about here today. So let's identify some cash flow killers. The first one, and probably the most obvious, is going to be collections. Julia did an awesome group call here a couple months ago about collections. I actually put a link to it at the end of my slides. It's in the group call inventory. If you're needing a deep dive into collections, I'd listen to that group call, and I would also book a call with your coach to help. Draw schedules for those of you that are remodelers. Your jobs are going to take a little bit longer. It's not like you go out, you do the work, you get paid. That's not your reality. Draw schedules is the #1 thing that we see to really solve collections issues for you guys and cash flow issues. Having a set, determined draw schedule. And we'll talk about that a little bit more here later. Who has ever gotten stuck into the trap of net 60s at 90s? I see quite a few construction people in this group. I have a feeling that we've all experienced this before. Great way to really kill cash flow is paying your guys, paying for materials and not getting that money for a month or more later. The second place that we see cash flow being hurt is going to be in something called change orders and callback policies. We're going to be talking about later in this call the 3 different types of change orders, how to handle them, also how to handle callbacks with your team. And then the third area that we see cash flow being hurt the most is what I'm going to kind of summarize as Parkinson's law. Does anybody here know what Parkinson's law is? I know Bryce does, because he argued with me about it a couple weeks ago. Anybody? So Parkinson's law is actually about time. And the concept is, if you give somebody an hour to get a task done, that really should only take 10 minutes. They're probably going to find a way to take up that full hour. The amount of time that we give is the amount of time that we're probably going to spend. Parkinson's law can also be applied to money and to cash flow, meaning that if you see the money in the account, you're probably going to spend it. We also summarize this as robbing Peter to pay Paul. You're taking money from other jobs to fund a different job, or you're taking profits and you're spending them as they come in. So at the end of the day, you're not seeing those profits. You're not knowing where those profits are going, and you're thinking you have a cash flow issue. So let's dive into each one of these areas. The first one, just briefly touch on, because like I said, Julia has an awesome group call about collecting, but it's vital enough of an issue that I want to talk about it again. Written, agreed upon draw schedules that are signed. This is all about setting expectations with your customer. The money needs to stay ahead of the work. I told you guys that testimonial about T&H in the beginning of this call. They are taking a 10% deposit on all jobs the moment that contract is signed. And then they're using that money only for that job, to buy materials or to pay when that job starts, to pay for the initial labor for that job. Money has to stay ahead of the work. You also want to make sure that the smallest amount of money for the job is collected last. You don't want to wait to collect 50% at the end of your job. That's going to really hurt your cash flow. Make sure that the smallest amount of that draw schedule is the last draw that you're going to take for that job. You know, we ideally like to see 10% being the last that you receive. Also, this goes back to net 30s. Collecting as soon as the service is performed. This is vital for service guys, plumbers, electricians, HVAC. No nets. I know that it's easy to say, Nicole, everybody does nets. I'm not going to have any work. It doesn't hurt to ask. And I would even go as far to say that if you have a client who's only going to do nets, we might want to replace that client. But it doesn't hurt to ask. If you have not asked to get out of that net or to get a better draw schedule or something, it doesn't hurt to ask. And if we need to replace the client, we'll replace them. Holding technicians accountable. I know this is like we could have a whole group call about how to hold technicians accountable. I feel like I have at least 3 clients a week complaining about holding technicians accountable. But a lot of times when I hear about cash flow issues, it's like, oh, my guy just forgot to collect. Or, oh, I just have a hard time. He doesn't like using the iPad, so I have a hard time getting him to collect. He has to call into the office. You know, we've got to hold our team accountable to collecting money as soon as they finish the job. We're collecting that cash. Credit card processing. It is in that day and age. People use credit cards. And so if you don't have that ability, especially as a service company, you really need to get set up to where you can take credit cards. Yes, there's going to be a credit card fee. The beauty of that is you don't need to absorb that cost. In fact, if you are, I'm going to tell you to change. So that fee, you can either build it into your prices, which is what everybody else does, or you can just let the customer know, hey, if we can do cash checks or credit cards. Now, if you decide to use a credit card, there is going to be a 2% fee that doesn't go to us. That's just to the credit card company for using that as a convenience. That's all you need to do. The ball's in their court. You're not absorbing that cost because that's going to hurt your cash flow and your profitability too. Now, the last thing I want to touch on collections is sometimes collections can be a bit inevitable, or maybe you inherited some collections issues, or you have some pre-existing collections. It happens. What we want to make sure is that we have a dedicated process to how to handle collections. We like to follow this principle. Who, when, what? Who is owning the collections activity? When are they doing it? And how are they doing it? We want to make sure that we have a process. And we want to make sure that that's repeated. If you have somebody who just calls collections once a month, they're not going to get much collected. Or if we just do it here and there, it's not going to happen. You're not going to see improvements. We got to have a dedicated schedule, dedicated system for collecting that money. And then one thing that our boss, Tim Redmond, always preaches to us is progress. If you have a client that's really being difficult with paying you, you've got an outstanding balance with them, you're needing to collect, work with them to come up with a schedule, get some type of payment that day. And if you need to break it up into a payment plan, you just want to have momentum. You want to have some type of progress seen to get that money collected. Now, let's talk about change orders and callback policies. The first thing here is we need a written and agreed upon change order policy. Bryce and one of his clients came up with a beautiful working agreement. We have it as a template. If you need it, let us know. It's got this change order policy in it. But there are 3 types of change orders that you've got to look out for on your jobs. And if we have a written agreed upon policy that we go over with the customer, you're setting expectations. three kinds of change orders. The first one is unforeseen issues. When you went out and you quoted the job, there was no way that you were able to see that, you know, the plumbing was actually 50 years old, you know, that was under the house. You couldn't see that. It was unforeseen. So now you're having to go to the customer and you're having to say, hey, when we quoted this job, we didn't know this. This was an unforeseen issue. This is what the new cost in the new timeline is going to be. And you're going to go over that with the client. They're going to agree upon it. You're going to sign the new contract, and then you'll move forward. You can't be punished for that. They can't be punished for it. It was unforeseen, but the reality is what the reality is. It's going to change the price and the timeline. We just need to adjust that in our contract. Now, customer requests. I feel like I have a client about once a week complaining of, oh gosh, Nicole, this customer, they just call me all the time wanting to change this, nitpick that, you know, add this, take away that, edit this, change this. So that's all fine and dandy. But when we go over our working agreement or our contract with the customer before we start the job, we want to make sure that we have this in our change order policy, where if they decide to change the scope of work or add something to the job, there's going to be a $250, I would say minimum, you can definitely go higher than this. There's going to be a $250 change order fee that does not go towards the cost of the job. It's just a fee to submit the change order. And then we're going to talk about the new price in the new timeline of the job. We're going to sign the contract with the adjustments so that we can make sure that that's not coming out of your pocket, it's not coming out of theirs. If you set up these expectations in the beginning, what you guys are going to find is that people are going to be a little bit more forthcoming in the beginning of what they want, because they know that if they submit change orders later, they're going to be spending a lot more money. It's also going to push back permits, it's going to push back timelines, it's going to complicate things. And then they're going to be a lot more intentional throughout the job of making sure that they limit their amount of change orders. And if you still have that Karen customer that throws in change orders willy-nilly, at least you're getting a little extra money for it, and you've got a set policy so that expectations are really clear. Now, the third type of change order is the we effed up change order. So this is my guy messed up, or I messed up, and it's now changing the timeline, scope of the job. Fortunately, that's the one that you're going to eat a little bit. That's going to eat your profit a little bit. They can't be punished for something that you did. But that is very rare, should be very rare. If that's a reoccurring problem with your team, then we've got a bigger fish to fry with the team. But that should be pretty rare. Shouldn't happen often. And that's the only one that's going to actually impact you negatively. These other two should not impact your cash flow, your profit, nothing. Now, a callback policy kind of goes in this we effed up category, is if you have a member of your team that is, or even a subcontractor that is consistently having to do the same work twice. You know, they're doing it wrong the first time, so we're having to pay them to go back out and do it again. We are paid to do it once. And so what we want to do is we want to have a callback policy that you have written and signed for each employee and each sub that states, if we've paid you to do work right once and you're having to go back out and redo it, that's on your own time. Or you can even, if you're in kind of a more liberal state, you might have to pay them something, but you can pay them as low as minimum wage for that time that they're going back out. It's some type of reprimand where if we've already paid them to do it right the first time and they didn't, so you don't need to pay them the full amount to do it again. We've got a great callback policy template and write-up policy template, guys. So if you need that, email your coach. We'll get it right over to you. It's going to solve a lot of these problems for you. Now, the third thing here, I saw Joey shaking his head. I think he's maybe dealt with calls before, so knows the pain. So the last thing that I wanted to talk about is back to that Parkinson's law. If you're in a situation where money goes in the account and money goes out of the account, and you're looking at your profit and loss statement and it's showing that you're profitable, but you don't got that money in your account, there's a few things that could be going on here. The first is we want to make sure that you are tracking your income and expenses. We've got a very simple spreadsheet here at Redmond Growth. It's real complex. It has one column that says income and it has one column that says expenses. And what we recommend is taking a month of your income and expenses and just line iteming it out. If you haven't done that in a long time, I'd recommend doing it because this is going to help you identify where that money is going, how much is going towards overhead, how much is going towards cost of goods sold. You're going to have a much better idea, and you're probably going to be able to trim some expenses out. Typically, when you do that, you're going to catch some things that don't need to be there. And so the first thing we need to be doing is tracking our income and expenses. As a month, I would also recommend doing this for individual jobs. This will also help make sure that you're estimating correctly. If you're tracking your income and expenses for each individual job, you're going to be able to identify pricing issues, estimating issues quickly. The next thing that's going to help solve this issue is Profit First. Is anybody here familiar with Profit First? I better see all of the Redmond Growth Coaches' hands go up. As Profit First professionals, I better see them. So Profit First is a cash flow management tool that's going to allow you to be able to really identify where your money is going at any given time. You're going to know exactly how much money is going towards your cost of goods sold, towards your overhead, towards your profit, towards your tax, towards emergencies, towards your pay, so that you can really keep track of that cash flow. You'll never be in a situation again where you're wondering where that profit is going, where your money is going. Now, a drip account is kind of a nuance of Profit First. If you've read through the book, you may not know about it. It's kind of a extra account they don't really cover in the book. But the drip account, this is what T&H Homes use to really help solve their cash flow issues, is if you're collecting a deposit for a job that does not start for a couple of weeks, you want to put that money in the drip account. And you are not going to use that money for anything until you are ready to start that job. This will get you out of the cycle of robbing Peter to pay Paul, where you're taking money from other jobs to fund different jobs, because that is a cycle that if you don't do something now to stop it, it's never going to stop, and it's only going to become bigger and bigger. And so that drip account is a brilliant tool to get you out of that habit for good. And I already covered this, but just Profit First is going to allow you to know your percentages, identify issues quickly. And like I said, every single one of the coaches here are Profit First professionals. We're very equipped to help you implement Profit First, and we've got a ton of group calls about Profit First. I'm going to give those to you guys later. Now, the last really key here to making sure that your cash flow doesn't get hurt is having an emergency fund or slow season account. I like to call this the expected unexpected. As business owners, there are expenses that we don't expect, that are unexpected. Truck breaks down. We got to buy a new piece of equipment. I've got to make these fixes to the shop. AC went out, whatever it is. We didn't expect it, but we know as a business owner, the unexpected is going to happen. We're going to have those unexpected expenses. There's no way around them. And so we've got to make sure that we've got money set aside for those expenses so that we're not having to dip out of our personal pay or out of our profit in order to cover them. Or you might be in such a dire cash flow situation that you're taking a deposit from a job to do it. Well, that's just going to totally wreck your profit for that job. And so we've got to expect the unexpected and have money set aside for that. Same thing for your businesses that are a little bit seasonal. I work with a boutique called Garden Diva. They do about 50% of their revenue during the holiday months for the entire year. Okay. And then once January hits, they're dead in the water. You know, and there's things that we're doing to try to generate some money, but that January season is always going to be a slow season for them. We can make it busier than last year, but it's always going to be slower than that crazy busy season. So what do? How do we combat that? Same with HVAC guys. Your summertime is going to be bananas, and we can do a lot of things to make your wintertime busier than it was the year before, but it's never going to be like summer. So what do we do so that we're not taking out loans? We're not panicked when that slow season hits. We have a slow season account. So what you do is you figure out, how much money do I need to keep the lights on in a given month to pay my overhead, to keep my team, to pay myself? How much money do I need to keep the lights on? What's that amount? And then throughout the rest of the year, you're just you're seeding some money into that slow season account so that when slow season hits, you have a couple months of revenue built up in there. So you're not having to take out a loan, you're not panicked, you've got money set aside for those months. My clients that have done this, typically, they don't even come close to spending that amount of money that they have set aside. But at least they're not panicked, they're not having to dip into profit. They're very intentional about having that money in there. We're expecting the unexpected. We're planning for it. So I know I covered a lot here today, guys. I'm sorry if you felt like I was a preacher on a pulpit. There was a lot of information, okay? We've got a lot of helpful tools. We've got a collections tracker. We've got working agreements. We've got callback policies, change order policies, income and expenses tracker. And we've probably got a dozen things I forgot to put in here. And so if you need it, if you want it, email your coach, we'll get it over to you. Book a laser call, we'll go over it with you. We've also got a ton of group calls about all of these things I talked about today, about profit first, collections, understanding your profit and loss statement, rush to revenue. You know, if you're feeling like cash flow is really dire, what are the things I can do to really rush that revenue, get money coming in? And so we've got a lot of tools, right, you know, for you guys to take advantage of. And so take advantage of them. That's what we're here for. But for today, I'm going to let Bryce put us into some breakout rooms so that we can answer any questions that you guys have.
That's right.